Welcome to this session on workforce development for employment and global competitiveness, where the focus is on skills. Thank you for coming. Let me invite on stage our panelists, Sue Parker, who's the Director for Skills, GEMS Education Solutions. Yeah, thank you. Paramjit Pabby, who's the Group Chief Human Resource Officer for the Dangote Group in Nigeria. Jan van Zilj, who is the Chairman of MBO Raad, Netherlands. And Alison Cunard, who's General Manager with Microsoft. Yeah. My name is Sanjeev Duggal, and I'll be moderating the session. As you can see, we have an interesting mix of both industry, which represents employer, as well as the private sector and government institutions, which are involved in ensuring the supply chain exists. The way I've structured this agenda is that I'll just put a context for 5 minutes, and then I will request each of our panelists to either speak or present for about 6-7 minutes, and then we can have a Q&A with them, and then I will just throw it open to the audience. We've seen how technology and globalization have reshaped economies around the world. In this process, a global labor market has emerged, bringing many benefits as well as challenges and dislocations. However, the employment market today is facing tremendous challenges, including growing unemployment and a growing pool of workers with poor employment prospects. Let me quote a recent McKinsey Global Institute survey. There are 75 million unemployed young workers between the age of 15 and 24 who are not in school or college, accounting for 38% of the world's total unemployed population. In 2010, based on current trends in population, education, and the labor demand market, the report projects that by 2020, the global economy could face the following hurdles: a potential shortage of 38 to 40 million high-skilled workers, i.e. those with tertiary education in advanced economies, or 13% of the demand for such workers. India alone, as a subcontinent, by 2020, will have to train 500 million people to be able to integrate all the youth into the economy. There's a potential shortage of 45 million medium-skilled workers, i.e. with secondary education and vocational training in developing economies, or 15% of the demand of such workers. A potential surplus, on the other hand, of 90 to 95 million low-skilled workers, i.e. those without college training in advanced economies or without even secondary education in developing economies, that employers will need. That is 11% oversupply of such workers. Basically, what I'm saying is that there will be too few workers with the advanced skills needed to drive a high productivity economy, and far too few job opportunities for low-skilled workers. Developing economies will have too few medium-skilled workers for growth of labor-intensive sectors, and too many workers who lack the vocational training to escape low productivity, low income work. The population of most advanced economies, on the other hand, is aging. And so most of the additions to the global workforce will be in young emerging economies like India, Africa, and South Asia. The most important trend shaping the global labor supply in the next 2 decades will be slower growth. New workers will enter at a slower rate, while older workers will leave in high numbers. The report states that overall the global workforce that was growing at 1.4% annually from 1990 to 2010 will grow at only 1% till 2030. There are challenges for advanced countries, how they have to double the growth rate in tertiary education attainment and create jobs for low-skilled workers. The challenges for emerging economies is that there is the capacity of high schools, and vocational schools and training centers have to grow at 2 to 3 times the current rate. Also, they have to increase their labor-intensive exports and investment in labor-intensive sectors such as infrastructure, real estate, etc. Businesses operating in this skills-scarce world must know how and where to find talent pools with the skills they need, and to build strategies for hiring, retaining, and training the workers who will give them competitive advantage. Businesses will also need to significantly step up their activities in shaping training systems in order to build pipelines of workers. By 2030, China will be replaced by India and the young developing economies of South Asia and Africa. as leading source of workers in a global market. These nations will supply 60% of the 600 million of the new workers that will be added to the global workforce by 2030, bringing it up to 3.5 billion. Governments of many emerging economies are taking cognizance of the fact that youth skilling is essential for economic growth. And mandate of skilling cannot be achieved without increased private sector participation. This is required both at the supply side, which are companies who will train and skill young people, and the demand side, which is companies which will employ trained youth in large numbers. Policymakers and business leaders across the globe need to find ways to vastly improve capacity to provide job-relevant education and training. Rechanneling the global labor force to meet future demands will require deep and wide innovations to improve the capacity, reach, and delivery of training systems. And businesses operating in global knowledge economies need to understand how labor markets and skill pools are evolving in different geographies to come up with their global recruiting and supply chain strategies. Having set that context, what I would like to now do is invite each of our panelists to give us their perspective or their experience, both as an employer or a government sector or a private sector producer of skills, either at the implementation stage or at the thought stage. Can I first ask Paramjit, who is the head of human resources for the Dangote group, which is a large Nigerian conglomerate, to share some experience with us. Thank you.
My fellow panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am from Dangote Group in Nigeria, and I would be sharing the perspective of workforce development and employability from a standpoint of basically the framework is from a very experiential standpoint, not from a governmental or a theoretical standpoint. This is the work that we have been doing for the last 3.5 years, and some of the results that we have achieved I'd like to share with you. My presentation structure would be a little bit about the group. Who are we? Mission, vision, values, how we have grown, our current businesses and future, a snapshot of Nigeria, economic indices, government policies, industrialization, and skill development scenarios, and Dangote Group's employability and technical skills development initiative. That's the one that we'll talk about, which is the Dangote Academy that I head particularly. And the business imperative for starting that, what is the structure and objectives of the academy, the programs, and the future direction. Who are we? Dangote Group is a very diversified and a fully integrated conglomerate, which is working in the areas of cement, steel, petrochemicals, fertilizers, sugar, cement, sugar, salt, etc. And it has a capitalization of over $15 billion. Our current interests, as I told you, are in cement, steel, and today the big projects that we are leading are in cement, fertilizers, and petrochemicals, with about investments of close to about $10 billion. The business focus, building local large-scale manufacturing capabilities to generate employment in Nigeria in particular and Africa in general. Providing value-added products and services that meet the basic needs of the Nigerian people through import substitution processes. In the past, as you would understand, Nigeria was a totally import-led economy till we started manufacturing in-house, and today, I will share with you an example as we go on in the cement space, where from a net importer, we have today become an export surplus country. Our mission, vision, values, to touch the lives of people by providing their basic needs. Vision is to be a world-class enterprise that is passionate about the quality of life of the general population and giving higher returns to its stakeholders. Our key values is customer service, entrepreneurship, excellence, and leadership. A snapshot of Nigeria, population 162.4 million as per World Bank figures. Demographic profile, below 14 years, 41%. 15 to 64 years, 55%, and only about 3.1% over 65 years. Literacy levels, 68%. Unemployment rate, 24%. The GDP per capita is about $2,600 per annum, and the GDP real growth rate is about 7.2 last year. Nigeria is an emerging economy. It's come a long way. Gained independence in 1960, fought a civil war between 67 to 70, mostly governed by military rule in the 60s to 90s, has enjoyed uninterrupted democratic rule since 1999, has been potentially a key player in African economic affairs, continues to face economic challenges of poverty, unemployment, poor infrastructure, and slow industrialization. Nigeria, in terms of its natural resources, blessed with huge amount of natural resources in the area of agriculture, oil and gas, and solid minerals. The sectoral contribution to GDP and global competitiveness, agriculture still contributes 40% to the GDP, oil and gas 15%, services 19%, trade 20%, and industry a mere 4%. Rank in global competitiveness out of 183, a poor 127, and infrastructure, if you see, 135th, which is not too good. The key to employability in Nigeria, basically three: infrastructure, industrialization, and technical skills. For Nigeria, that is blessed with vast resources, including young people, which is 55%, as I told you. The key to employability is basically development of infrastructure, rapid industrialization, which is huge investments in manufacturing, and development of skills of young population for the gainful employment. Development of infrastructure being the key. What we have looked at is the government is starting to focus now on basic infrastructure development through private sector participation in infrastructure. Recent power sector reforms have gone a big way in terms of private sector participation in generation and distribution of power, overhauling of the rail and rail transport systems, dredging of River Niger for improvement of inland waterways. The government is moving in the right direction on its industrialization agenda. Most of the government-owned companies which had turned sick have been privatized. Participation of private sector in industry, especially in manufacturing, through the backward integration policy, which is on course. A case study on cement. Prior to independence, Nigeria has been a net importer of cement, as I told you. All the plants that were operating were turning sick one by one. The last 4 were finally privatized by the government. Today, the story is that from a net importer of cement, we are an export surplus country, which has all happened in the last 10 years. We today produce about 28 million tons, and my group produces 20 million out of the 28 million tons in Nigeria alone. We have operations in 14 more countries. We are going to be having a footprint across Africa, and we're looking at another 8 million tons, another 20 million tons of cement coming out of Africa other than Nigeria. Government policies and initiatives. The Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan, which was launched by the government in a direct response to poor contribution of industry. The plan is basically threefold: create jobs, improve productivity and industrial growth, and develop skills to improve youth employability in the following 4 areas. Education and skills development scenario. Nigeria has remained slow in development for its inability to exploit its natural and human resources. 10% of eligible children are unable to go to school. Success rate of primary school final grade is about 75%. Only 28% of secondary school students who are qualified to apply for universities and polytechnics get admitted. It's 132 accredited technical colleges and 70 vocational enterprise centers need major improvements in existing facilities. Nigeria's accredited 70 polytechnics and 164 monotechnics could only admit 22% of the applicants in 2009. Unemployment figure is approximately 49 million, which is 52%, with 52% unemployable on account of lack of skills. A very telling thing. This is a little bit about the academy that I lead. The mission is to be a center of excellence for corporate leadership skills, technical training, and vocational skills acquisition. The vision is to provide talent pipeline for the Dangote group while filling the industrial gap in Nigeria. An interesting thing is, of all the people that we train and pass out, 75% people are retained within the group because our needs for trained manpower are humongous, but consciously 25% of the people we let go to the economy as trained people to be employed in various other industries. This is the structure. It basically talks about how the academy is helping at what levels of management, with what kind of programs, but the focus is on developing, reskilling, engaging, and empowering the Nigerian youth. 4 strategic objectives: to be an umbrella organization for all talent development and learning initiatives for the group, to provide facility and platform for technical skills acquisition, to provide unique opportunities for polytechnic and university graduates to acquire industrial skills through structured training, and to collaborate and build partnerships with institutions of learning, training, industry bodies, and government agencies. From the snapshot of Nigeria, the following key issues emerge. There's a wide-scale gap between what the industry requires and what the economic institutions offer. For our business that is expanding and growing rapidly, sourcing the right skills in the right numbers at the right times is the key and a big challenge. A serious involvement of private sector in addressing the skill gaps in Nigeria has become very paramount and urgent. Therefore, the academy is essential to providing talent pipeline for our businesses while promoting employability in Nigeria. Current programs: we have selected and trained 6 batches of vocational trainees at 50 batches per trainee. That's 300 people in all, in vocational skills like welding, fabrication, fitting and mechanical maintenance, heavy-duty automobile maintenance, instrumentation and automation, and electrical and process operations. We have a graduate trainee scheme under which we take graduate engineers. We have selected and trained 100 of them in 2 batches. We have a graduate drivers academy where we train graduates for driving our own trucks. We have 5,000 trucks which basically transport our products from our factories to the consumer. And we had problems in terms of using legacy drivers, so we decided to experiment with graduate drivers who we are able to give the truck that he owns after 300,000 kilometers. So from a truck driver, he becomes a truck owner, and from a truck owner, he becomes a fleet owner. So this is how we empower and we create entrepreneurship even in the area of transport. We have programs in the pipeline in refining and petrochemicals, sugar refinery, and finance. Ongoing collaborations: we are currently looking at partnerships with German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development to establish a German-style dual vocational and education training in Nigeria. Basically, it is to we are looking at how to collaborate with technology and equipment suppliers, build partnerships with universities and management schools, work closely with technical training institutions in pursuance of technological excellence, and associate with industry bodies and government to uplift industry standards and knowledge. We have currently an ongoing construction of an academy campus costing about $6.5 million, which will house, in the first phase, 250 trainees going up to 1,000, and it will be equipped with high-tech workshops, online learning facilities, and other infrastructure. We also have plans of extending our footprint into other parts of Africa. We're looking at establishing 2 more satellite academies, one in Central and West Africa, and the other in South and East Africa, basically to train and develop local talent and skills for those countries. The operations of these academies will remain centrally guided for consistency and quality, but will be executed locally. The challenge, Nigeria needs to create almost 25 million jobs over the next 10 years if it is to offer work to new entrants and half the current unemployment rate to 12%. This is why we are willing to take part of the challenge at the Academy to push Nigeria's employability. In summary, government needs to focus on linking education to employability, create large number of industrial training centers for dual vocational education and training, drive further investments in infrastructure to propel and fast-track industrialization, because job creation and employability are both direct results of industrialization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paramjit. I think an excellent best practice that I could see was that you actually train heavy truck drivers and then make them entrepreneurs so that they own the trucks and so on. That I think is a great practice. Can I request Sue Parker, who can give us a view from the fact that you've run vocational colleges and are involved in consulting with both companies and governments on this space?
Thank you very much, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to be here today, and I'm going to take a slightly different perspective to my former colleague. I'm going to start with a statistic, with apologies to those of you that have heard me speak recently. The UK Commission for Employment and Skills in the UK in 2010 said that 90% of the jobs of 2020 have not yet been created, yet 80% of the workforce is already there. And for me, that means there is an enormous skills shortage and an enormous skills gap emerging. And I think this is one of the key things that we are now going to have to find ways to address over the coming years, pretty fast. We know everything is changing and that global competitiveness is becoming very much a key issue. But we also have heard, and I went to a conference that the British Council ran here in Dubai, and one of the key messages that came from that now is we have too many graduates. We have too many graduates in all kinds of parts of the world. We still need to have the thinkers, we still need to have the research scientists, we still need a substantial number of science, technology and engineering graduates to really drive economic competitiveness and to look at innovation and creativity. But one of the things we are failing to do at the moment is we are failing to actually train and create the places for those people that are actually going to man the power stations, that are actually going to do the food processing, that are actually going to do the things that are going to make our countries move forward. And one of the things, therefore, we need to look at is different approaches to skills and skills development. And I think that's one of the key challenges we face at the moment. We have to set this also into the context of mobility, skills mobility. I live in the UAE. I am a migrant. There are 7.2 million migrants in the UAE compared to 1 million Emiratis. Many people in this room will be migrants of some shape or form. Therefore, one of the other things we need to think about when we're thinking about skills is we need to think about skills mobility, recognition of skills, skills in one nation that can be recognized in another nation so that we don't have to keep on repeating learning. And I think that's going to be another key challenge for us as we move forward. The third challenge, so that's the first two challenges. The third challenge is around the whole of the business of how we work with industry. And we've had a very good example here from the Dangote Academy in Nigeria of a very important skills development initiative. But I think we need to think a little broader than that in some nations. In some nations, the informal economy is vitally important. It's where many people end up working. We also know that in many nations, sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, that there are large numbers, 50% of the population is under the age of 15, or 35% of the population is under the age of 15. And they too are going to need to move in many cases, will start to move into the informal sector. So we need to find approaches that enable people who are already in the informal sector to be able to develop their businesses, to be able to develop their skills in such a way that they too can help to contribute both to the economies in their own countries and to human capital development. Because if we don't address competitiveness, global competitiveness and human capital development hand in hand, then there's going to be quite a time bomb sitting here waiting for us. So what are we going to do about all this? Well, I think, frankly, that the don't do anything option is not an option. You know, it's not a passing fad. There is a major, major issue here to be addressed. We can certainly look at how we deal with vocational education, and we should look at how we deal with vocational education within schools. Too many nations, and we had this alluded to this morning, have tended to look at vocational education as the fallback option. The bit you do if you can't be an academic. Other nations, some nations have started to think about using vocational education as a positive choice. And in some parts of the world, and I use the example purely because I'm familiar with it, of parts of Northern Europe, Finland and Denmark, it is a positive choice at the age of 11 that you go to a vocational school. But that is not that it's a dead-end vocational school. It's a vocational route through to higher education. So that people that come out through that route, go into higher education, can both think and do, which is actually what we need when we look ahead. So we need to have a slightly different view of how we work with vocational education in schools. Now, one of the things you probably haven't heard me mention that yet is that word qualification. I've been talking about skills, and it's absolutely correct that people do need to be qualified. We do need qualifications. We need that for recognising skills. But at the end of the day, too many of the qualifications that we offer at the moment are old-fashioned. They're based from about 4 years ago, 6 years ago. They're nice and comfortable for us. And very often they've not been developed with industry involvement. So one of the things I think that we, as educationists working with government and the private sector, industry sector, have to think about is what skills do we really need to move nations forward, as well as what qualifications we need, and how we recognise those skills, given the global mobility I've just been talking about. Therefore, one of the things that we're looking at GEMS at the moment is how we incorporate skill incubation within our processes. And skill incubation might be at a number of levels. It might be at government level, but how we help governments to think about skill development as opposed to big projects that perhaps put in a qualification framework or big national occupational standards. There are lots of these around already. We don't need to keep on recreating them. What we need to do is actually use them to enable and to facilitate. We need to get government, public sector providers, private sector providers and industry working together to enable human capital development and global effectiveness. What we don't need is more structures and enforcement. We need to move to enablement and facilitation. And we need industry to work with us, both in the public sector and the private sector and with government, to help us to specify what they want, help them to specify what they want, that we can then convert into programs that really work. And I'm loath to use the example of the UK because that's obviously where I'm from, but we've had a big push for apprenticeships in the UK over the last few years. I should say that most of those apprenticeships have not been attractive to young people, and most of them have been people who've been reskilling, which of course is an important part of what we're talking about. But now the government is increasingly looking at apprenticeships as a way forward to actually help people to get into higher education levels, to do equivalent to higher education work, but through an employment route. And I think we have to be much more imaginative about how we use apprenticeships, internships, skill development programs, schemes like enterprise schemes and entrepreneurial schemes, working specifically with industry, and also fast-tracking where we can in order to be able to move young people and indeed career changes forward to deal with this issue of the 2020 jobs. So conclude, just what I'd like to say is that I think that the private sector needs governments, and the private sector, whether it's educational private sector or industry private sector, needs governments to develop and support enabling legislative frameworks. Government actually needs the private sector, whether it's the industrialists or the private sector education providers, to look at new ways, creative ways of addressing this major skills time bomb which we've got sitting ahead of us, which will both help us with human capital development and, of course, support economic prosperity.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much, Sue. And I think, I am going to throw questions at you later, but 2 points that I picked up was that the huge percentage of future jobs that will need skills that have not yet been created. And that's quite a challenge in terms of creating those skills. And I think your comment on graduates, the sheer number of graduates is interesting. I come from India. Everybody's a graduate in India, right? And because, it costs only £2, sort of a month to be a graduate. But yet we've got a projection of 500 million unemployed in the next 10 years. And there's a huge sociological issue around this, which I'll throw some questions later, but thank you very much. John, can I invite you? I mean, you've been on the government side, you've been a member of parliament, and you're also an advisor to the government on this space. Let's hear your views.
Thank you. So, distinguished guests to this conference, and dear ladies and gentlemen, by preparing for this forum, I took a look at the website and saw the quotes of several esteemed persons on the co-chairs of this prestigious event. And in my short introduction on the skills theme, I will focus on the problem that was raised in the quote of Mr. Arana Bakova, the Director General of UNESCO, who mentioned the dramatic mismatch between skills and the work and the necessity to ensure young people with basic skills and relevant training in order to give them an entrance on the labor market, and to provide an answer to the current economical downfall in Europe. And although the status of vocational education and training is still rather low compared to the academic studies, there is nowadays a kind of common agreement about the importance of VET or TVET as a crucial factor for sustainable growth, and let's not forget social participation and inclusion. It's now recognized as the concrete backbone of economical stability, or as the lubricant to smoothen the transition from general education to the labor market, and to facilitate the right match between demand and supply. If we now take a closer watch to the different VET systems in the world, it cannot be denied that those countries with VET systems that are strongly linked to the world of trade and industry, including the services industry, have the lowest youth unemployment rates and are apparently better equipped to follow the changing demands. In Europe, for instance, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, my country, the Netherlands, are all countries with a tradition of blended learning systems with a mix of in-company training, in-company learning, and school. And they all show low youth unemployment and stronger economies compared to those countries with a more theoretical approach. And of course, this is not the full explanation of the differences between the European countries concerning the impact of the crisis, but a certain correlation cannot be neglected. Moreover, these countries with blended learning systems in VET have established well-working mechanisms to match the demand on the labor market with the supply of skilled young people. Speaking now about the way we have organized things in my country, after all, that is where my experiences are mainly based on, I'm happy to say that we have achieved a lot of progress in the last years regarding the mutual understanding between the world of the work, enterprises, employers on the one hand, and educational training on the other hand. Recently, a few years ago, we established a foundation for cooperation on vocational training and the labor market, which is the meeting place for employers, enterprises, and education and training providers, where both parties are equally represented and where agreements are made regarding qualification system, the quality as such, exams, the in-company learning part, apprentices, and the efficiency of the VET education. The agreements that are achieved within this foundation are supported by both employers and education and the training providers, which makes the foundation has become the main advisory board to the government regarding VET policies. But not only the government, also for the schools and for the enterprises. It has certainly not always been the case, but meanwhile both parties have well understood that they need each other and that they share, after all, the same interests. And also from the employer's part, it is recognized that we have to prepare our young people to the labor market, not only for vacancies. It's about a sustainable duration participation on the labor market. Of course, it remains difficult to prepare young people for unknown future needs, and in my opinion, this means that we need a VET system, VET learning pathways that qualify for access on the labor market, but also follow-up studies. They need to respond to the demands of the employers, of course, but also at the same time they need to be flexible enough to make career changes possible. It's obvious that we need to bring the worlds of employment and education closer to each other. But although I am a convinced believer in blended and dual learning systems, last but not least because it gives the best value for money, I am not an advocate of a VET system that is fully depending on the willingness of companies to take young people on board and train them. In times of regression, this has provided to be tricky because companies might keep their doors closed for apprentices due to a lack of orders, and I can understand that. We have seen this in Germany when it was in economic crisis for 15 years ago. Hardly to believe nowadays. I prefer a system that is flexible enough to meet the changing needs of the labor market. In the Netherlands, we have therefore two learning pathways, a school-based one and a work-based one, both leading to the same qualification, but with the same value and functioning like communicating barrels according to the economical situation. In this way, the system is always able to offer a VET program for everybody, for every youngster. Moreover, it provides also an answer to the different demands on the individual learner, because in my opinion, VET institutions have the duty to inform students profoundly about the employment perspectives of certain training programs, but they should leave the final responsibility with the students. My short summary of important elements in VET in our situation, in our country, coming to an end of my intervention. Firstly, a shared responsibility, as I mentioned earlier. We need schools with teachers and trainings know about the world of employment. We need employers that want to be engaged in the learning pathways of youngsters and that can provide guidance with qualified tutors. After all, this is also in their interest. Then there should be no dead ends for VET learning pathways, but possibilities to continue to the highest levels. Thirdly, we need the involvement of all partners to offer also opportunities to the weaker ones, so that nobody should be left behind. And fourthly, we should be for sure pay more attention to entrepreneurship. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is certainly not a complete list, but I think I've consumed my time. I trust we will have time to explore these issues during the further course of the forum. I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Jan. I think you've very well articulated a developed economies approach to the entire vocational system. Yeah. And when I do the Q&A, I do want to throw a question at you as to how will you, how to replicate this in emerging economies. And there are some challenges there which I'll just throw up after I've asked Alison to say a few words. Alison is the general manager at Microsoft. So another employer's perspective, perhaps.
Yes, thank you. Hello. Distinguished guests and GEMs, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel today, so thank you for your time. I work for Microsoft Corporation. I work in a group that's focused on skills and employability as it pertains to Microsoft technology out there in the world globally that runs small businesses, medium businesses, institutes, governments, entrepreneurs, and partner organizations to Microsoft around the world. Much of our technology is out there and being run by skilled people in the workforce. But as my fellow panelists have outlined, we are facing a severe technology skills shortage in the world. So it is our team at Microsoft that's focused on putting assets in place to help drive the skills in the market that we need
to make sure that those companies in your countries are successful. So one of the things that we're facing not only is today's shortage of skills, but also with the changing technology, rapidly transformational changes in technologies that we're seeing happening today in the market through cloud technologies and mobile technologies, that the skills that are there in the market today are not the skills we need in the future. So not only is there a shortage today, but that shortage is expected to broaden significantly in the years ahead. So it's definitely a responsibility we feel of ours as a technology company and other technology companies to ensure that we are providing paths for people to grow their skills appropriately to support the future of enterprise. So it's a challenge for us. It's not only a challenge in education, but it's a challenge in workforce development. So for those job changers, those retirees re-entering the workforce, new entrants into the workforce. So I just wanted to point out three things that we see as key success factors to those programs that governments are putting in place around driving workforce development. And they've actually already been touched on by the panelists. First, quality training. So quality training from qualified teachers and trainers. That's really, really key to the success of these workforce development programs. So many times governments will put a program in place, they'll offer e-learning as a broad way to reach many people and hopefully scale skills, but the reality we see is that it really requires the assistance of a trainer or a teacher to really make sure those skills land as they need to. The second piece is measurable outcomes, and this was already spoken about, and from our perspective in the technology industry, this is industry recognized, globally recognized technology certifications. We think that's a key to success. And then the third thing is apprenticeships. So commitment from industry to support those that are learning through industry programs within their companies. So this is the third thing, and this was also touched on by the panelists. So those are the three areas that we think are important to focus on from a workforce development standpoint from a Microsoft perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. And very appropriately, the amount of trainers and teachers that are going to be required are going to be in the millions, and that's a very relevant challenge. What I thought was, we've heard everybody's perspective. I thought there are 4 or 5 major areas concerning skills development globally that I could throw some questions to the panel on, and I could then throw it to the groups subsequently. And these are, one, some of the largest masses which are going to require skills are in emerging markets, emerging economies today, right, in sheer numbers. Yeah, so China, India, Africa, South Asia. And there are social systems in the East which there's a hierarchy of vocational skills vis-a-vis cognitive degrees, et cetera, right? Clearly an MBA student is a more prized groom, in an Indian household, for example, than a plumber, right? And driving skills in societies where there is such hierarchy in the social system, how do you think we're going to do that? Because, are there some best practices of where any one of you have worked in emerging markets where you've been able to break through this, even in small groups?
I would like to make
Sure.
I would like to make a comment on that. I just touched upon our Graduate Drivers Academy. We have, as I said, a very large transport business with about 5,000 trucks and trailers which transport our goods. Now, Nigeria, like any other African country, still relies very heavily on paper degrees, graduation, post-graduations, PhDs. They think those are basically the pathway to careers. We decided that out of a sheer need that our transport business was not doing well, our legacy drivers were not being very safe on the roads, there used to be a lot of accidents, and there used to be a lot of pilferages. We decided that we needed to probably have a different category of people getting into driving. The whole challenge was how to give dignity to the role of a driver. And we wanted graduates because we felt graduates probably had a better upbringing, a better mindset, better value systems, and a little more knowledge. So when they come into this profession, probably we would get our equation right. When we advertised for the position for graduate drivers, there was a tagline which said, "You don't need to know driving." The idea was, we will teach them driving from ground zero. We had already worked out a program with the Nigerian Institute of Transport Technology, and we put them through a program. Believe me, we had 17,000 applications against that. There were 10 PhDs, there were 200 MBAs, there were a host of postgraduates, and balance 7, 8, 9,000 people were graduates. In a country like Nigeria, where employment is rampant, graduates used to normally prefer to remain idle and join the unemployment queues, but not to work in jobs which they thought were lowly jobs. But here was an example. When we advertised, we got so many applications. We had a huge, humongous task in terms of going through a structured process of selection. We selected 2,000, and we have already put the first 1,000 through the process. When I went for the inauguration program for the first 100, there was still a lot of simmering discontent among the graduates who joined the program, saying, "Oh, did I join the right trade? Did I join the right program? Will I last? Is driving job really worthwhile?" And 3 months later, during the same process, when I went at the end of the program and they were graduating, there was a large sense of pride. There was a pride because we instilled in them the pride that a driver's job is equally important. You carry millions of naira worth of companies' goods on the roads. You are driving an asset which is worth another millions. So you are a very, very important segment of the company. And that probably, I think, these people we have now put into the business, and they are driving a brand new fleet of.
I think it's a good example, and I think perhaps the fact that you created self-employment, or they become entrepreneurs because they owned and drove that truck, may have helped change the social thing. That's a good example.
I'm sure that the key for a better image and more appreciation for say, vocational trained students is in the hands of the employers and in enterprises.
Yep.
You see in the countries with a more dual system, Germany, Switzerland, even better than in the Netherlands, but especially Germany, Austria, Switzerland, the image of vocational trained people is much higher than, for instance, in France or even in the Netherlands. So where the employers are very engaged with this education, you see a higher level of appreciation.
I agree with you. I think the challenge is in the emerging markets really, because the employer is coming from society itself. So, and there is representing society, and therefore there are still huge issues around even the employer giving similar significance or stature to skilled people rather than just simply qualified people. People who've done degrees and things. That's a big challenge.
Yeah.
I've just got one slightly different example. This actually comes from the migration example. And this is when migrants from Mauritius come back from France, where many of them actually end up. The French government has put in a scheme with employers to enable those migrants, when they go back to Mauritius, to use the skills that they've gained, which may well be quite different skills to those which they've actually taken at college or even as graduates, and to then be able to develop their own small businesses and help drive forward the Mauritian economy through the small business sector. But I think at the end of the day, the small business sector is going to drive many, many of the emerging economies. And that's when I said, when I was speaking earlier on, I think that we need to look at skills and skills recognition and ways to acquire skills rather than large qualifications. If you're running a small business, you do not need an MBA in something. You need marketing skills, you need skills to actually understand your local markets, you need how to do customer service, and you need to be able to package those up in a very particular way. And that's when I think we'll start to make some inroads.
Okay. I'm told we're running short of time, and this is a huge issue, the social issue. But I just thought I'll connect one more topic, and I'll try to sort of capture all my other three focus areas into one. Clearly, again, in large markets, funding of vocational training is a big challenge because a lot of people are poor and are not able to pay for it. Industry is selfish and will only spend as much money as required to fill their own jobs. Are there any best practices that you've seen of how this whole process can be funded effectively in emerging markets? Any case studies or any best practices?
I will say, I think funding is a challenge, but I think we had a lot of discussions before about public-private partnerships. I think those can be successful. I think the challenge that we see is that funding often isn't directed into the right programs to drive the right outcomes. And that's really, I think, the bigger challenge than the challenge of funding itself. And so if you can take that funding, make sure that you've got the outcome-based program in place, I think you'll see that be better used and potentially drive better outcomes.
So who do you see paying the bill?
Well, I think it's partnership, right? I think that's what we tend to see.
Government and industry together.
Yes.
Because the individual is going to, in emerging markets, individuals are rarely able to afford this.
What did you say?
I said the individual.
The individual,
finds
that's
it very hard
correct.
to pay for
Yes,
this to get skilled.
correct.
I would like to comment in terms of probably, the best model is public-private partnerships. Governments have their own issues. You have a lot of bureaucracy, and the whole process, by the time it's implemented, takes time. So you have enlightened employers who, apart from their own need for their own business, are also looking at national contribution to nation building. They have to start. Once they start and they are shining examples of success, you can always rope in the government, you can rope in donors and multilateral agencies from overseas. We are now starting at looking to build a building and construction academy. It's got no business with cement in terms of, for my skills.
It does.
But what we're looking at is how to upgrade the standards of building and construction in Nigeria. And in that, can we use part of the academy to start a building and construction trade where we'll churn out plumbers, carpenters, masons in hundreds. And then you're getting the government through, will not be a major issue, I guess.
Well, thank you. I think clearly this whole skills subject is vast, and we could spend hours discussing this, and I'm short of time. But I think the few things that the panelists have touched on have definitely are the most significant issues that are facing the skills development piece worldwide, and I'm sure we can interact informally. Thank you very much. Yeah?
Thank you.
And thank you for attending.